In case you have got a questions, you can. In case you have got any questions raised about the previous class, you can do it right now, or else I'll finish the class within half an hour. Then you can start. You can raise issues after half an hour to 45 minutes. Okay. There are actually, I'm supposed to talk about the minorities in Indian context and their rights. Or I can talk about the farmers' issues now. Well, there are certain things while talking about the minorities' rights in Indian context. The debates that have gone into the making of the rights among the minorities in India. One important debate is about how they have been given two sets of rights in Indian context. How to look at the two sets of rights. When you talk about the two sets of rights, what kind of two sets of rights that we are considered about? Particularly, these two sets of rights are enshrined in the Constitution. In that context, what exactly are the rights enshrined in the Constitution that needs to be focused on? The second debate is that how the state has come to look at the minorities in Indian context, particularly up till 2005, when the state came out with what's called the Sacha Committee report. What are the issues that are being treated as the major issues of the minorities? Did it really speak about the rights of the minorities? The third important issue is that whether the minorities in Indian context can be seen as a homogeneous group. That's the most important. Let me get into that issue first, and I'll come back to the second, third important issues. Can they be constructed, can they be construed or treated as a homogeneous categories in Indian context? There has been a debate in Indian context. You know that in the Indian context, there are a couple of minorities. There are linguistic minorities and the religious minorities, whatever it may be. But we are concerned about the religious minorities. We are not concerned about the linguistic minorities as such. In India, while analyzing the rights, one important myth that has been constructed in Indian context is that the minorities are a homogeneous lot, a single category, a single homogeneous category who have no differences, who cannot be differentiated. In other words, the differences within the minorities is completely absent, given the fact that religion does not permit, or the religion does not recognize the existence of ascriptive identities For example, ethnicity, the religion, particularly this argument has been made with regard to the, what's it called, the Semitic religion existing as well as, operating in Indian context, particularly Muslims and the Christians, including the Sikhs also. Sikh is not a Semitic religion. One argument is that since this religion, this Semitic religion, which are nothing but the Abrahamic religion, doesn't recognize the presence of ethnic groups, ethnic identities, or what is called the Kabilas, or even the structure like the caste, because everybody, becomes part of the single whole. Everybody dissolves their identity with the larger identity of the religion. That's the reason why they cannot be constituted. There will not be any kind of differences. There shall not be. There shall not be differences within the community, within the religion, within the practicing people. Christianity doesn't allow. The Islam doesn't allow. So while looking at the whole aspect, I think why I'm trying to bring that particular notion is that today the right issues needs to be disaggregated into the smallest communities. Why I'm trying to argue the case that within the religion, within the communities, there are differences of caste, there are differences of the classes. Rights of the upper class, rights of the upper caste is not same as that of the rights of the marginalized class, because the options available for the marginalized class are limited when compared to the upper caste. That's the reason why, in that context, why I'm trying to bring in the new issue is that we need to develop a new theoretical model to understand the rights in Indian context, particularly trying to create spaces for new perspective on rights debate. A debate from the perspective of the subalterns, a debate from the perspective of the marginalized vis-a-vis others. So my whole contention is to disaggregate the communities, disaggregate the religion, disaggregate the notion about the homogeneity in Indian context, which is basically done at two levels. Homogeneity argument is constructed at two levels. One is at the level of the constitution. One is the constitutional construction. Basically, minority is a political construction. Like the ST, a category which has been constructed by the state. It's a political construction. The very concept of the minority is a constitutional construction as well as a political construction. But the state or the politics always constructed the minorities as a single whole, as a homogeneous whole. It won't differentiate between the upper class and the lower class. Why I'm trying to say that, even though the religion, whether the Christianity or the Islam, who constitute the big chunk in the minority debate, particularly the Muslims, because the Christianity constitute very microscopic. Because I'm taking these two aspects, given the fact that they are the Semitic religion. There are other minorities, Buddhist as a minority. There's a debate, and the Sikhs, whether they form the Hindu community or the Parsis, a completely different community. See, the thing is that we are not being able to accept the fact that there are multiple sub-communities, sub-caste or the caste within the religion. Religion, even though it doesn't recognize the prescriptive identities, doesn't recognize the existence of different multiple ethnic groups, but it is a fact that the religion also has given rise to what is called the multiple practices, multiple social structures. I think Indian context, when it comes to the question of Islam, one argument is made by Veena Das, who says that there is something called the folk Islam. A folk Islam is a Islam of common people, particularly those who have been living at the margin, or those who are trying to use the folk culture as a part of the Islam. So I would call that, in that case, one can call that folk, values have been indoctrinated into the Islam, and that's the reason why minorities have got this kind of folk culture, folk narratives, folk social practices. Or the second, you take the case of the argument of Akbar, not Akbar Zaidi, S.A. Akbar, I think, who argues that there are multiple Islams. What is this multiple Islams? Islam is one. What he means to say that there are multiple ways of looking at the Islam. Because as it went from Arabia to different parts of the world, it absorbed literally some of the cultural practices of the locality. So it has created what's called the hybridity of the communities. For example, when it went to the West Indies, and it created the hybridity of, particularly with the arrival of the Indian indentured laborers into the sugar industries, sugar fields, sugarcane field. And the Hindus who went from India, particularly from the Bihar. What happened? The successive generation created a hybrid community, which is neither Muslim, neither Hindu. The similar case in the Fiji. So it created something called a hybrid community. Multiple communities. It created this kind of hybrid communities. So, and also if when it went to these Afghanistan places, like Afghanistan for Pakistan, it borrowed the ethnic values into the community, into the religious fold. That's the reason why the religious, for example, ethnic values have been part of Islam. For example, blood for the blood, which is not actually the Islamic, which has become a part of the society. So the whole argument is now, for example, when it went to the Indonesia, in Indonesia, it overlapped with the local culture. So Ganesha became part of the Indonesian currency. So one side, it created something called the hybridity of the communities. What happened in Indian context? Has it been able to create something called the hybridity? Has it been able to create the syncretic culture? Has it been able to create what is called a tolerant society? or has it been able to create what's called the caste structures from within? Why I'm trying to bring this particular aspect is that we need to understand the rights, minority rights from this perspective also, which has not been documented, which has not been debated in the right narratives, in the right discourses. One of the important arguments is that the religion has also created what is called the hybridity of the knowledge, hybridity of the communities. If you look at the documentations, pre-colonial documentation, pre-British documentations, you have got the inference, you have got the reference to the caste operating within the community, within the religion. For example, Baruni's, not Al-Baruni, Baruni's argument, or somebody like Sharia's argument. If you look at their argument, there's a argument about the diversity within the community, and the argument about the caste operating. There are other literatures as well, which try to say that caste did exist among the Muslims. But it is slightly different when compared to the Hindu social order. Hindu social had as a history in an imagined past, probably in the Vedas or whatever it may be. In the Islamic history, it has a specific time period. It emerged in the context of the medieval period with the arrival of the Islam. It arrived at a time when Islam was negotiating with the local community for the business purpose, trade purpose. For example, the Bhatkal, the community which is called the Nawayat are basically a hybrid community of Arabs and the Jains. Maplas, in the context of the Arabia, for example, Malabar, they are the progenies of Arabs. Similar case was what's called the Labbais in the Tamil Nadu. So once the trade became a part of this hybridity of the caste, but at the same time, Sufism also created conditions for large number of backward classes converting to the Islam and carrying forward the values of the caste. And that has created what's called the syncretic culture, or what is also called as healing traditions. It also created hybridity. But this particular caste, which was created, was different when compared to the Hindu social order, as I said earlier. One is that you have the internal flexibility which is available for the new converts. One can claim the ladder of upper caste. Like, for example, it's a Sheikh Sayyid, he can become a Sayyid or the Sheikh. That's the reason why Pinjaras or Banjaras have retained the title of what's called the Sheikhs. But the ethnographic studies for a large number of census reports say caste system did exist. They've documented, for example, let me quote Ambedkar. Ambedkar is most important here because he was one of the first to recognize the presence of a category called the Arzals, were nothing but the people from the lowest caste becoming the Muslims in history. So in fact, he recognizes three castes among the Muslims. One is the Ashrafs. Ashrafs belong to the upper caste, particularly Sheikh, Sayyid, Katan, Nawaz, Labbai, and others. That comes to the upper caste. The second is the Arzals. Arzals. Arzals are the one who were converted from the OBCs, who carry these, who belong to the occupational caste. Different occupations, occupational caste, they become Muslims but still retain these kind of occupations. Third is the Arzals, who literally belong to this lower caste.
Muzaffar, Assadi. 40%.
Who belongs to the lower caste, actually, they were converted. For example, they retain the same identities. You know that there are articles which says that the lower caste, like the halal course. Halal course were basically from the Dalit community.
Halal andre ಏನಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ನಿಮಗೆ. halal ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. halal.
ನಾನು ಹಲಾಲ್ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಹಲಾಲ್ ಕೋರ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಹಲಾಲ್ ಕೋರ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ಜಾತಿ, ಅದರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀನಿ. ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ನೀವು ಮಾತನಾಡಬೇಡಿ. This halal course, you know, the name given by the Akbar, whatever it may be. Why I'm trying to say that, look at the caste categorization of the minorities needs to be located, needs to be recognized for understanding the rights among the minorities, which has not been, recognized by everybody except the Sacha committee report. For me, why Sacha committee report becomes an important component, but an important component is the fact that it was the first report, a comprehensive report, which recognized not only recognized, but also detailed the social status, socio-economic status of the minorities. Probably while understanding the socio-economic status of the minorities, probably one has to locate their rights, the absence of the rights, or the minimal availability of the rights, exercise of the rights available to the minorities in Indian context. Going back to my argument, in fact, the Ambedkar was not the first person to recognize the existence of the three castes among the Muslims. Even though I think his book on partition of Pakistan, he details about three castes. For example, Ouds, the census report of the Oud of 1869. It also talks about how the caste categorization has become a fact among the Muslims. And one thing good about Ambedkar is the fact that how a ruling class became a subaltern class over the years, how minorities become a marginalized class in Indian context, looking at the political issues that was involved in that one, how the colonial policies ultimately marginalized a community which was once a ruling class, and within 30 years of 1857, the first war of independence, how this one community became a marginalized class, a subaltern class, which later on became a perpetual argument to ask for the benefit from the state, and which has been later on, castigated as the appeasement kind of thing. So caste is a factor, and that's the reason why we need to destroy this homogeneity argument while understanding this homogeneity argument while understanding about the rights. And that's why, because that the rights of the marginalized to exercise, or to not only to exercise, but to availability of the rights, you need to understand. So are three factors. What is the availability of the community, the rights, the availability of the space to exercise that right, which is also limited. Availability of the alternative rights to the marginalized communities who were literally from the marginalized caste, for example, Zadekulas or the Halal Coast and others, are limited. In other words, their rights are almost similar as that of the Dalits. Whatever it may be. Now, as I said earlier, you need to understand two important factors in an Indian context. One is Indian context, Indian constitution, and Indian context. We try to look at the minorities as a single homogeneous group. As I said earlier, the minority, the very word or construction of this, the minority conceptual categories basically belong to the politics. In other words, it's a political construct. Minority is a political construct. That's the reason why you need to go into the whole debate on minority, reservation in the Constituent Assembly debates. Leave apart, but the constitution makers make in a scuttle manner, which is very scuttle, where two kinds of rights are very much apparent for the minorities. What are these two kinds of rights available to the minorities? One right we call that is the general rights. General in the sense that which is available to each and every citizen, wherein everybody is treated on par with each other. Leave alone the political rights, right to vote. There are other rights, right to freedom. Right to freedom is available to everybody, irrespective of the gender, caste, communities, and whatever it may be. Everybody has the right to freedom or the right to association, right to redressal, redressal of the grievances. All these rights, some of the rights are basically fundamental rights. Some of the rights are political in nature also. Right to participate is equal. Everybody has an equal opportunity to participate in the election or hold the office. Everyone has the right to, contest the election. So you have got an equal right. And for example, even the right to vote is given the fact that its weight is equal. I mean, it's not, you cannot have the discriminatory practices. Even the judiciary cannot make any, discrimination simply because he belongs to one community. So it's a grand design to have universality of the right, universal applicability of the right, and grand design to have, exercise of this right. irrespective of without any discrimination. So that's the reason why one form of right is the universality of the right, uniformity of the right, and the exercise of these rights, and also the alternative rights, availability of the rights, which is not denied simply on the ground of his religion or caste. As a citizen, he has all the right to move around, all the right to exercise his votes, all the rights to association, all the rights to criminal procedures, all the rights to contest the election, participate, grab the power. But at the same time, there are specific rights. That's the reason I said that there are two ways. The specific rights are those rights which are exclusively given to the minorities. In other words, Constitution begins with we the people of India, where everybody absorb their identities. Everybody dissolve their identities and claims the status of a single nation or forms a single nation and imagine themselves that we belong to the India. But at the same time, you have the identification of the communities. The whole question is that whether the state has recognized the presence of the differentiations within the communities. That's the most important while talking about the rights. I'll come back to that one, how the state recognized it. I don't know. One argument of the Charles Taylor is that in his politics of recognition, he says that if you don't recognize the communities, they will simply be marginalized. State needs to recognize these communities. I'll come back to the third argument. The second argument is that whether there is any specific rights given to the minorities in Indian context. The state recognize the particularities of the communities. Now the whole argument is that we begin with the homogeneity, we went into the differentiations. Second stage is the differentiation within us. So you have got the minority complex, minority categories. And the whole debate went in the Constituent Assembly. How to recognize their rights? How to recognize their right to preserve their culture, their memories, their beliefs, given the fact that we have got a rich diversity of the belief in Indian context. Probably that debate was brought in the context of the Uniform Civil Code also. And our state came into existence on the basis that we will remain always as a secular state on side. But at the same time, there's a concern to protect these minorities, either the religious minorities or the linguistic minorities. But it's not the Muslims alone, but also the Christians, Buddhists, Sikhs, and others, Parsis and other Jains. I think the 6 denominations, they've been categorized as minorities in Indian context. But the whole debate went on paradoxically. While narrating about the minorities, the debate fixed on the Muslims more than any other communities. Recently, the debate has moved to the Christians. Earlier, in between, the debate stuck to Sikhs, and partly in 50s, post 50s, and in recent days about the Buddhism. Buddhism in terms of its growing popularity. reversing the, bringing back the Buddhism into India, because Buddhism, which originated in India, has moved out of the country for various reasons, religious reasons, political reasons, and other things. Basically, the religious reasons, and particularly the conflict which took place. Six become the another important component. Minorities, their rights have been debated again and again. Now, particularly the debate, the debate is that whether the Sikhs or the Buddhist or the Jains needs to be understood in terms of the Hindu social order, whether the Hindu law code should be applied to these communities. Even though Sikhs have been opposing that, for saying that we are a separate religion in Indian context. And now, secondly, the Sikhs, the politics of agitations, politics of resistance has given rise to separate notions about the aggressiveness of the community, and also subsequently the argument about the loss of rights. Sikhs have been talking about the loss of rights that has ultimately converted into the separatist movement in the Indian context, particularly arguing that after 1967, after the Green Revolution in Punjab, even though Sikhs have, Punjab, which is predominantly a Sikh region, has emerged as a region of rice bowl or wheat bowl of India, but it has not given rise to the employment opportunities to the Sikh population. And the large number of unemployment in the context of the Sikh has been treated as what is called the discriminatory practices of the Indian state. And in that case, they say that their rights have been violated. They're not being able to exercise their right. They violated in the sense that the right to absorb their population in the non-agriculture sector has been reduced. And if you look at the recent debate on farmers' agitations, you can go back to the earlier argument of the farmers' suicide. Farmers' suicide is an argument which is, generally explained in terms of the larger whole, saying that the agrarian economy is in deep crisis, given the fact that the liberalization or the globalization has, created a distress peasantry or the farmer. It has created loss of economy. It has created condition for distress economy as such. And the market that the globalization has created the loss of right over the produce or the right to distribute or the market they produce, right to an autonomous farmers. So all these things have led to the farmers committing suicide. In fact, the earliest distress or agrarian economy was felt in the Sikh-dominated area, particularly post-Green Revolution. Green Revolution was supposed to create economic prosperity, economic self-sufficiency in Indian context, has not been able to solve the basic problems of unemployment, basic problems of the development. Rather, it sharpened rural and urban areas. It sharpened what Marxists call the contradiction between the urban and the town. Or it sharpened the conflict between the rich peasantry and the agricultural laborers. So ultimately what happens is that the agrarian distress translated into separatist movement, which is now known as the Khalistani movement, and ultimately created a whole debate on the loss of rights, particularly in the context of the farmers. One is the agrarian distress of 1970s and 80s, which was reflected in the series of farmers' agitation. And again, in the recent period, farmers' agitation for 1 year plus. The second was reflected when series of farmers committed suicide in the Sikh-dominated area, particularly the Sikh farmers. So you have got this minority where, Sikh as a minority, whole debate is about, can you accept Sikhism as a part of Hinduism? But they're still considered to be the minorities. So you have this kind of the politics taking place where the whole minority issues are addressed through the analysis of agrarian structures, through the analysis of the crisis in agriculture, through the analysis of the entry of the big market forces, big industrialist forces or capitalists entering into the agrarian economy of the this Sikh-dominated area. And there are I would give one simile with regard to how the crisis went on. I've witnessed between Chandigarh down to Wagah border and other places. Each Sikh house, one BMW car standing in front of the portico, but it will not move. Because when I asked them, they said that we don't have the purchasing power to put the petrol, but we have got a cars. That's where the crisis is located. You have the modern gadgets, but the purchasing power is very less. Probably this is same kind, in the context of the Coorg. Coorg is a separatist movement. How do you look at that one? One can look at that debate in terms of the development and the deprivation. Coorg is highly developed. Its economy is providing huge amount of money to the state exchequer. Highly capitalist oriented. And the economy is linked to the global economy. But paradoxically, the Coorg is the one district which was once a state, has no basic facilities. They don't have the university. Engineering college came recently, medical college came recently. They don't have the hospitals, even though in the Human Development Index, it is one of the best, it is one of the topmost. Literacy rate is very high. But the basic facilities like the roads, I would say that they are pathetic. Communication is also poor, but prosperous state. Similar case argument one can bring in the case of the Sikh as a minority dominated area, which is a wheat ball of India, highly prosperous area. But at the same time, the notion of deprivation is very, very high. Their whole argument, the loss of rights, basically the loss of rights, because we need to understand the communities in terms of the rights. Their loss of rights is understood or mediated through the analysis of the agrarian structure, agrarian economy, or agriculture sector, or the agrarian crisis, or even the suicide of the farmers. But this is not the case with the other minorities. In the case of the Muslim minorities, let me take up another one is the Kyrgyz cannot be, they can be brought in here unless and until they define themselves that they are the minorities. They've been arguing that they are the ethnic groups. But here, in the context of the Muslim minorities, what is the kind of argument? Whether their argument is mediated through the argument of agrarian structure, or whether their argument is mediated through the loss of what's called the specific rights given in the context of the Constitution. Constitutional right, as I said, there are two kinds of rights. One is the universal right, and the second is the specific rights. One thing is fairly clear with regard to minorities, Muslim minorities in Indian context, is that they are not linked to the land. They are not linked to the land. Linked to the land in the sense that they were once linked to the land. They were zamindars, they were jagirdars, they were big landlords. Just before the colonial rule. Once the colonial rule introduced different policies, for example, the private property. When the colonial rules replaced the causes in the court, when the colonial rule introduced English in place of Parsi, Persian and Sanskrit, which affected the Hindus as well, in 1834. When colonial policies excluded Muslims from the military, when the court was filled up by the non-Muslims as judges, Muslims lost their dominant position and became the subaltern classes. So you got these historical memories. For example, like Ambedkar talks about these kind of arguments. He says that memories of loss of what's called hegemony, loss of power, loss of rights, particularly in his book, Pakistan, Partition of India, something of that kind, wherein Ambedkar narrates these kind of issues. Memories becomes a part of, demanding for something else. So the Indian context, how to look at whether the universal rights have been lost or the specific rights have been lost, or how their rights discourses or the narratives are mediating truth. I would say that there are two kinds of narratives, three kinds of narratives in Indian context. One narrative came from the state, as usual, the government. Up till 2005, I would say, state would say that Muslims issues are very, very, very few. It never bothered about the loss of rights. It never bothered about even though there were communal riots, never bothered to say that their rights have been either denied or they have been violated. Whether it's a Kanpur or other places where the communal riots have literally pushed the community to the margin. State would not say that this needs to be located or needs to be reconstructed or constructed as the loss of rights, probably loss of rights and the exercise of rights. Probably that was the first time explained by Asghar Ali Engineer, who said that every communal riots have denied the children their right to play, have denied the women to move out of their house freely. It denied the community to market, to enter into the larger market, enter into the small market. And that's the reason why right violation is manifested in the context of communal riots, which is also seen in the context of the COVID, which is also seen in the context of the other things, ethnic conflict also. Like, for example, the latest pushing out of the roadside hotels, restaurants in one predominantly state, Indian context, where the vendors have been asked to vacate their restaurant, which is situated on the roadside of the national highway, that has literally denied their right to livelihood. Whatever it may be. State never, up till the 2005, state never bothered about looking at the communal rights as the space where the rights are being denied. It is true. I mean, when Asghar Ali Engineer writes about how these communal rights have taken away the right of the children to play in the Maidan, in the sports, probably what Thorat argues about the Dalits completely applies to the minorities in Indian context. And even what European continent said about the Dalits, it also applies to the minorities. How they are being denied in a market, denied a place in the market. But whatever it may be, the state remained silent about that particular thing. State thought that their issues are basically 3 or 4. It never tried to expand. Up to late 80s and 2005, I would say. For example, issues of Aligarh, autonomy to the Aligarh Muslim University, 370 articles, anti-slaughter, anti-cow slaughter, Uniform Civil Code. State thought that these are the 4 or 5 issues of the minorities, not beyond that. Since we are given these universal and the individual rights, community rights in the Constitution, and the Constitution became a celebrating point, a celebrating space for the minorities to exercise their right. cherish their rights, and also, defend their rights. Not beyond that. That's the reason why communal rights doesn't get the space, doesn't get the priority in the whole analysis of the state. But actually, as I said earlier, there are three important components to understand the right-based issues of the minorities. One is how the state looked at the rights, where they exercise, where they analyze. This is diametrically opposite to the Sikh as a minority. Second is the understanding the rights of the minorities in terms of different policy measures or what is called the commissions, where the role of the state cannot be denied, where the commissions which are appointed by the state, which derives its whole power from the constitution, recognize the beginning with the, let me begin with that one. If you look at the different commissions or the committees, have recognized the diversity within the community and the availability of the rights in that context, or the spaces required for this, exercise of this right. For example, like beginning with the Kaka Kalekar Award at the central level, which recognize the differences within the community, which one can call as the caste. Kaka Kalekar Committee recognized the presence of not less than 150 castes. Even though, as I said earlier, it was recognized by Ambedkar, even out census reports and colonial census report right from 1871, 1881, 1891, 1901, 1921, 1911, and that was the end. But except in 1951 also. There are ethnographic studies also recognized. But Indian constitution post-independence period, different committees recognized, Kaka Kalekar, Mandal Commission, including Karnataka, you have this, what's called Nagan Gowda Committee report, Havanur Committee report, Venkateswamy Committee report, and all these committee reports recognize the presence of diversity, presence of the caste-like structure within the community. That's the most important, this construction of the rights in terms of the recognition. And the most important committee report that recognized the rights, I would say that such a committee report, I think the 2005, which came out in 2005. Which doesn't mean that prior to the Sachar committee report, there isn't any committee which recognized the socio-economic backwardness. What I'm trying to see, look at, this is a second important component which brought the right discourses to the mainstream of the politics. There are other commission reports also, like for example, Gopal Singh committee report, prior to such a committee report. Or you have the Ranganath Mishra committee report. They recognize the violation of the rights in terms of the economic criteria, economic backwardness, or a socio-economic backwardness, and also the diversity within the community. One of the findings of the Sachar committee report is the deprivation point of the minorities. in the socio-economic spheres. One example I would give. Why the right to have the banking facilities, right to have the banking facility or the economic activities. Why the economic activities are not taking place in the minority area is the fact that banks treat minority areas as dangerous zone, or what is called the red zones. And that's the reason why it is argued that there are no banking facility available, or banks are hesitant to enter into the minority areas, and they are least bothered about creating the spaces for the economic activities in the minorities areas. The deprivation in terms of the economic accessibility, deprivation in terms of the economic resources is seen in terms of the right discourses also. Second important right discourses came in the form of a narrative on the security issue. You know, the argument is that even though Zachar doesn't talk about this matter, but I'll try to bring it here. The argument that the minorities are least bothered about the food security. It's true, because you know that they live in poverty, or they're born in poverty, they live in poverty and die in poverty. So poverty is not a big problem for the minorities, because you know they are, you know, this is everyday life, you know, practices. And that's the reason why food scarcity is not a big problem. Not a major issue, major debating issue, but rather the debating issue is the physical security of the community or the minorities. Physical security in terms of two aspects. One is the providing security, what's called the physical security protection of the community. Second argument is how the community has moved into the ghettos. A ghetto is the locality where the communities live in. A slum area, which might comprise of the slum areas, or an area where you have got the community living in the flats. I would call it, you know, Mangalore. Since I belong to the Mangalore, I know about that. Mangalore, you have got the high-raised buildings, flats, where one single community living. I call it as a modern ghettos, urban ghettos, flat ghettos, where community feels secure. So the whole narrative about the absence of the rights or the exercise of the rights is argued from the perspective of security. The third important, the developmental deficit. Most important is the developmental deficit is seen as the rights violations. It is said that minority places have no basic facilities like water, sanitation, hospitals, banks, educational institutions, employment, etc. If you look at all these things, probably even including the bureaucracy, whether the state bureaucracy or the national bureaucracy, so their presence is very, very less. Where do you, then in that case, where do you locate the minorities? Minorities, as such a committee report says, they can be located in unorganized sector. They can be located in ghettos. They can be located in non-formal sectors. These are the sectors which became a huge space where they cannot exercise their rights, given the fact that it has created a structural constraints to exercise their rights. So in the context of the minorities, particularly the Muslims, the right-based argument mediates to the analysis of the socioeconomic conditions at the national level. Now, if you look at and that's the reason, unlike the Sikh, where the analysis of the rights mediated to the analysis of the agrarian crisis, agrarian economy, because they are predominantly the agriculturalists, the farmers. In the context of the minorities of the Muslims, it is mediated through the issues of the socioeconomic deprivation or the analysis of the state. We try to say that, look, only you have got all the rights enshrined in the constitution, and you exercise that rights, you celebrate that rights. But in the context of the Christians being a minority, their argument of the rights is now emerging actually. They are the silent, it's like the Parsis. Parsis as a silent community which has prospered. The Parsi as a minority came from the Iran as a persecuted community in history, like the Sindhis as a minority in Indian context. Sindhi has no region to claim. Similarly, I mean, even Urdu cannot claim its regional identity, whatever it may be. Sindhis don't have the region. And similarly, Sindhis, if you look at the Sindhis and the Parsis as the minorities, Sindhis came at the time of the partition and lived in India and emerged as a very prosperous community. Similar is the case of the Parsi. Parsi history is a history of persecution. It's like the Labbes, I mean the Muslims, but also the persecuted communities in history. This community came in India, settled down. They became one of the richest communities in India. They never claimed, one important thing is affirmative action. They don't want, they always argue that we don't want any reservation. They never bothered about the violation of the rights because they never faced, except in, I think almost 100 years back, there is a kind of communal riots in Bombay where the Parsis were targeted. Otherwise, Parsis remain a very, very submissive, calm, accommodative community in Indian context. But they are the most prosperous category. I would say that they are more entrepreneurial, but mostly I would call them as a philanthropic community rather than the enterprise industrial community, industrial capitalist class who try to appropriate a more tolerant community. The Christians now they feel, particularly now the argument, particularly after the conversion bill that has been adopted, but the fierce psychosis and the right issues began to trickle down probably a couple of years back when Father Stanley and others were murdered in the context of Orissa, where in the tribal area. But they feel that the attack on they now issues of the rights are mediated through the issues of the conversion or the social security or physical security or the practicing church, practicing the religion inside their institution, or preservation of the institutions, right to convert the people and other things. That's the reason why their way of understanding the right has mediated through the issues, the contemporary issues of conversion, identities, preservation of their practices, or contributions. Now the series of attack on the NGOs, particularly the NGOs which are being funded by the church, which are being linked to the global, international market, or the European continent, which are coming under the scanner. They feel that their rights are being washed, their rights are being curbed, their rights are being denied or defined now, discipline and other things. That's the reason why their issues are mediated through the practice of availability of the spaces to practice their religion, preserve their church, retain the linkage between the NGO sector and the global sector, and other things. So you have got the three important, looking at the three religion, or even four. If you look at the four important minorities in Indian context, right issues have mediated through different methods, different methodologies, different processes. For example, in the context of the Sikhs, it mediated through the analysis of the agriculture sector, agrarian economy, the crisis of the economy. The Muslims, it mediated through the socio-economic deprivation, ghettoization of the community, developmental, what's called the issues, development deficits, and other factors. And also, among the Christians, this issue of the minoritism is, the rights issues are being mediated through the issues of what is called the cultural practices or the social practices, and the retention of the identities. That's the reason why, and at the same time, we need to understand the rights of the microscopic communities within the community itself, the caste. For example, Dalit communities, Dalit among the Muslims, Dalit among the Christians, Dalit among the Sikhs. We need to understand how these Dalits they feel, or the Dalit among these three communities, they feel about the loss of their rights from within, rather than from outside. That needs to be seen. That's the reason why my argument is that the right discourses or the right narratives needs to be redefined, needs to be readdressed from the perspective of the below one side. It needs to be seen differently. It needs to be disaggregated from each other. That's the reason why single narrative of the rights vis-a-vis the minorities is difficult, or it is not, essential component in the context of the contemporary period. That's what I'm trying to argue that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, there is no question? Okay.
Dear fellow participants, if there are no questions, I propose the vote of thanks.